Inventory automation is possibly the most transformative tool that logistics teams can have in their arsenal. Managing inventories can be tricky, given the large amount of data and moving parts there is to keep track of. Not only is it challenging to understand the current state of our inventory, there's so many spaces for error as we're copying data from one system to another. Inventory automation seeks to solve that problem. Hi, I'm Kevin from Budibase, and today we're going to use Budibase to build an inventory automation process. We're going to build it around existing datasets with minimal custom code. We'll track and collate inventory based on sales, returns, and consignments. We'll also add a UI panel that will allow users to find out more about the current state of the stock and restock by emailing the vendor. Inventory automation is where we'll use digital tools to complement or replace processes within our inventory workflows. This can range from single tasks to full-blown processes. We might be dealing with relatively generic tasks like data centralization or order processing, but we also might be thinking about tasks that are very specific to your business and your use case. In either case, the goal is to maximize efficiency, visibility, accuracy, and reliability within all of your processes, allowing you to be confident that when your system tells you the items in stock, you can sell, knowing it's going to be fulfilled. This is what we'll be building. Obviously, a lot of the automation isn't visible on the front end. This is what the user can see. We can click on rows and we can find out more details, and we can order specific quantity when we're ready to restock. We can also see how stock has changed across a number of categories. So let's dive in. If you haven't got a Budibase account already, you can sign up for free at budibase.com or self-host your Budibase instance wherever you would like. Once you've set up and logged in, you'll arrive here at the Budibase portal, where you can manage any apps that you already have or create new ones. We're going to create a new one. You can create a new application using any of the templates that Budibase provides by importing an application from another source or by starting from scratch, which is what we're going to do. This is going to be our inventory automation application. I changed the name, the URL is being updated. This is at my local host /app/inventory automation, but if you've got this deployed to your own server, it will change the URL. We'll create the application, and since all Budibase apps are aimed to help you turn your data into action, the first thing that we'll do is to find out where your data is so that we can help you leverage it. So whether or not your data can be accessed through a set of API endpoints, a relational or non-relational database, or even a spreadsheet product like Airtable or Google Sheets, you're able to use your data inside of your Budibase instance. My data is in Postgresql database, so I'll copy in my connection details. I'm going to enable SSL and click connect. This will give me a list of all the tables that exist inside of my database. And not all the tables are going to be relevant to the application I'm building. So I can unselect all and then choose the ones that are going to be relevant for me. In my case, I care about consignments, inventory, returns, sales, shipments, and vendors. I'll fetch those tables. When I fetch the tables, I can now access them in a spreadsheet-like interface. Each column is representing the fields in the database, and each row is representing a row in the database. I've got a full CRUD functionality. I can create, read, update, and delete records from here, and that will be represented in the database immediately. Each of our database tables has data that we're going to use in our application, and you can see there are foreign keys referencing other parts of our table. So in this consignments table, we've got an inventory ID and a shipment ID. In the inventory, we've got reference to our vendor ID. In our returns, we've got reference to our sale ID. In our sales, we've got reference to our inventory ID and so on. So these tables are interconnected and relational, and we'll need them as we build up a full picture of our data that we're going to use throughout our application. To finish off our data model, we're going to add a second source. We're going to create an internal Budibase table that we're going to use to be able to keep track of stock. We'll call it inventory changes, and we'll create it. We'll then populate the columns we want to store. We'll have item name, which will be text. We'll have inventory ID, which is going to be a number. We'll have change type, which is going to be a set of options. And the options we'll want here are a return, a sale, and a restock. Having an options column means that when I add a new row, I get a drop-down menu to choose from. It also can inform my front end, and it allows it to choose a picker rather than an open field. I also want my quantity change, which will be a number. And lastly, my new quantity, which will also be a number. That's our data ready. Now let's start with our automations. So I'm going to jump to the automation tab and start creating an automation. Let's start with handling new sales. We'll call this a sale added automation. And for automations, we say when they want to be triggered. That can be on when a row is created, deleted, or updated, when we receive a webhook external from our application, when we have an app action, which is normally triggered by a button push within our application, or a cron trigger, some kind of time-based trigger to allow reports to run once a week or clean up our database once a day, something like that. For this, we're going to have row created and save. Then we're going to pick a sales table because it's when a row is created in the sales table, and we'll click plus. Now in the table that we created, we had those categories like item name, inventory ID, change type, quantity type, and new quantity. And we're going to get all that information from our sales table. However, we're going to need to know how many items in question we had in stock before the sale happened. So our first action is going to be to query rows. We'll point this to our inventory table. So this now will make the full inventory table accessible to us in the next steps. But we only want the row with the ID attributes that corresponds to the inventory ID from the sale. So we'll define filters and we'll add a filter. We'll say ID equals a binding because we want this to change on the trigger. If I hit this lightning bolt, I can see I get trigger outputs from the row, and specifically I want the inventory ID from that row, so dot inventory ID. So we can test this by adding a row to our sales table with the inventory ID of 2. And we can see that's going to return the raker, which has an ID of 2. What we get back is this object with a key of rows and then an array of responses. There's only one item that matches the ID, so we'll only get that back. Now there are two things we want to do with this automation. We want to update the inventory based on this sale, and we want to add the details of our changes to our inventory table that we created inside of Budibase. So we'll start by adding an update row function. And we want to update a row inside of our inventory table. So everything is largely going to be the same as the previous step. So if I hit the lightning bolt, step 1 outputs rows dot 0 dot and then the name of the row I'm actually in. So vendor ID. And then we're going to do the same for item name. I'm skipping quantity deliberately for a second. Item name, unit price, and row ID. And row ID, if we look, is just called ID in our output. So we'll just call it ID. Now for the quantity, we want to do a calculation. We want to add together the output here, so the quantity here, to the quantity that's going to come in from that row. So I want to return the quantity from step 1, So rows.0.quantity. And if it's a negative quantity because it's a return or a restock, we want to add on. And if it's a positive quantity like a sale, we want to take away. So we'll take away the trigger row dot quantity. And we'll save that. So we can test our automation again. This time we've got an inventory of 2 and say we had a quantity of 2. So we've sold 2. We should see that we can make our inventory reduce by 2. So I save that. I can see here that the inventory quantity is 132, and here our inventory quantity is now 130. So we're successfully updating what's going on here. Lastly, we want to create a row in our inventory table. So this is our inventory changes table. And we will want the item name, which we'll get from our trigger. So our trigger row.item name. We'll want our inventory ID, which will also come from our trigger row. So inventory ID. Our change type, this is a sale, so we want a sale. Our quantity change, so this is going to be trigger row.quantity. Our new quantity, which is going to be a JavaScript function that's going to be very similar to the one that we had before. So the steps 1 quantity minus the trigger rows quantity. And we'll test again. And we'll run through each of these steps. The row, once the row is created, it will query those rows. It will then update our row from our inventory, and then we'll create a new row. And we can check back on our table here. Our inventory changes has indeed been created. Awesome. So that's our sales added. The next thing we'll do is we'll duplicate this, and we'll create a similar automation for a return added. So let's save. So the first thing we want to do is our initial. We want to swap that out for the returns table. In our first automation, our sales table had a link directly to our inventory table, but our returns table doesn't. So if we look at our data model, our returns table doesn't have a link to a inventory. It does have a link to a sale though. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to look up the sale, and then from the sale, we'll need to look up the inventory, which is then going to give us the details that we're going to need. So we're going to need an extra step in here. So we're going to query a row from the sales table. And the filter we'll want here is going to be that the ID is going to equal a binding of the trigger outputs row.sale ID. So when our return is created, it's created with a sale ID. Our sale ID will then have a inventory ID. It will look up our inventory ID and get our details. So once I've got the data from the sales and the inventory, I can re-update the inventory. Now these numbers are slightly different because we're getting the vendor ID from row step 2 now rather than step 1 previously. The quantity is slightly different. We're getting the quantity from our inventory table, and we're adding on the quantity from the sale. So rather than the return holding that data, the sale holds that data. So we're adding that on. And again, for these, we're just saying this is step 2 rather than step 1. Step 2 rather than step 1. Step 2 rather than step 1. And now our item name doesn't come from our trigger anymore. Instead, it's coming from our step 1 when we looked up the sales table. And again, because it returns an array, even when there's a single item, we'll need to use .0. Our change type is return. Our quantity change is from that row as well. And last but not least, our JavaScript function is the same as what we used before. Save that. And now we'll test it. So let's say sale with ID 41 was 5 bulldozers. And I'm going to test that. Okay, so we got 5 successes. First of all, we can see that the trigger was created. That tells us that we got this extra row in our returns table, lots of information about it, and lots of things going on. But what was our row? We had a sale ID of 41. So sale 41 here had a quantity of 5 bulldozers. So we now want to look up, and hopefully we've got the bulldozers in here, our output. Brilliant. And we see bulldozers have a quantity of 2,260. So loads of bulldozers going on in there. So then we want to update that. And we hopefully want to set it to be 5 more than that. So 2,265. Brilliant. And then finally we'll create a row in our table, bulldozer, return type, quantity of 5, and 2,265 is our new quantity. Amazing. So another part of our process is when we get procurement, when we've got a new item. So we'll duplicate this again and we'll rename it consignment added. Consignment added. And we'll change our trigger to be to the consignments table. Now, consignments already has a reference to the inventory ID and the item name, so we don't have to do that interim lookup to the sales table like we did for the return. The only change we need to make is our JavaScript functions. So rather than subtracting, we want to add on our quantities here. Change our change type to restock, and again, update our new quantity to be a plus here as well. So we'll finish and test. We'll add something to our consignments. We need an inventory ID and we need a quantity ID, and we could put the item name in as well. I think 2 was a raker. So I test that. I can see successes all the way down. I can see here that gets created with lots of metadata. But when I query the row, I'm getting details from the raker, which is 133 of them. I'm then going to update the row, which hopefully means there's 135 of them. What we can see is this quantity, 133, has changed from 133 to 1,332. And that's because in our JavaScript, this is going to be a string that we're adding to a number. So they've just been concatenated. So what I can do is I can wrap these in numbers. Whoops. And save this. As always, there's a blog post accompanying this video, which means that all of this can be copied and pasted if you're struggling to type it and follow along. Let me try to run that test again. And we can see, yeah, that changes from 1332 to 1334. Amazing. And we've created the other row. The last automation we want to build is a little different. We effectively want an automation that will allow our users to trigger an email to a vendor to restock for a given amount. So we'll add another automation, and this time we're going to have it triggered by an app action. And this is going to be order more stock. And we'll save it. So I'm going to have some fields. I want an order quantity, which is going to be a number. And I'm going to want the inventory ID, which is also going to be a number. So from the inventory ID, I want to query that from our inventory tables. Query rows, inventory ID, filter it by ID equals a binding of trigger outputs fields dot inventory ID. And we'll save that. So now we'll have the query from the inventory table, but we actually need to look up the vendor now to see where the email is. So we want to do another query rows. This time we want to look up the vendors, and the filter is going to be the VID, vendor ID, equals a binding to from step 1 rows dot 0, because remember it's an array with one item in it, and there's a vendor ID field on our inventory table. So we can save that. So now we've got the item we're ordering and the vendor we want to order it from. So with that done, we can send an email. Now, if sending emails being ghosted out for you, you'll need to set up your SMTP. We'll link to a video above where I talk you through how to do that. So I'll click on this here, and I want to send to the vendor's email address. So in our data table, let's have a look at our vendors. That's going to be found at contact email. And our vendors is going to be in step 2. So we want to get step 2 outputs, rows, dot zero, because there'll be one vendor that matches this ID, contact email. Who are we sending from? Well, this is going to be whoever we got. So maybe logistics@example.com, wherever your email is. What's email subject going to be? Well, it's going to be order request for, well, the item name. And where's the item name? It's in our inventory output. So step 1.rows.0.item name. And then we can add our HTML content. Now this is HTML. So if we want new lines, we'll need to use paragraph tags. So let's do that. So we say dear, and then let's use our vendor's name. So step 2, rows.0.contact first name, new paragraph. We require how many? So this is from our trigger row. So trigger outputs fields dot quantity. We require quantity, and then what of what? And that's going to be from our inventory table again, rows.0.item name. So one of, maybe it should be one bulldozer, maybe with an S in brackets. Let's assume that we're always going to order more than one. We require 2 bulldozers, 3 rakers, all the rest of that. Can you process this request, please? Best wishes, logistics team. We can save that and we can test. So maybe we want 5 rakers, which had an inventory ID of 2. So we had our fields, inventory ID of 2, which looked up and found the raker, which then queried our vendor who sells the raker, which then created an email, which is going to be sent. So email sent to the right email, and we can see the content would use the right template here. Cool. So that's our automations finished. Now let's tie it up to the front end. An important thing to note is that automations only work when we publish our applications and share them with our users. So if you're finding an automation isn't working, it may be because of that. So let's build the admin panel. I'll click on table. I'll use the inventory table as my base and I'll confirm. I then get my role-based access control. So basic means they'll have to be logged in, power and admin or elevated roles, and public means that anyone can access this. Well, since this is going to email our vendors, we definitely want it to be password protected, so we'll leave it at basic and click done. Budibase will auto-generate a working CRUD screen for our inventory data. So let's make a few changes. Let's capitalize our title. We'll disable this button because we don't want to create a new row from here. So we'll uncheck this show button. Then we'll turn off pagination and increase our scroll limit to match the number of rows in our inventory table. I know that there's only 10 items that we stock, so I'm going to leave my scroll limit at 10. So we're happy with the design. We're going to hit the eject button. So we can do that either by pressing this eject block right at the bottom or eject over here. And we're doing this because we want to adapt the side panel. We don't want the normal side panel, which is there. Inside the side panel, this detail side panel, there's a form block. There are a couple of design tweaks we're going to make to this before we eject this as well. First, we'll remove the delete button's text, which will just remove the button. Then we'll align labels to the top. And with that done, we'll eject this block as well. For each of these fields, I don't want anyone to change them. So I'm going to click disabled. The whole point of this is that they can order more, not so that they can change the stock directly. So I'm going to cover each of those. And I'm going to add another field at the bottom, which was the order quantity. If we remember from our automation, we had the inventory ID and the order quantity. So this is going to be our order quantity. We'll just call it order quantity. We'll add order quantity here. We'll also add a validation rule to say this is required, because when we push this button, we're going to trigger the email. And if the order isn't here, then we won't want to do that. So let's do that. Let's update the button. So we'll say order, and we'll look at the actions. We'll see what's here. Validate the form. Yep, we want to do that. We want to make sure that there's that the order quantity is there. And we'll want to close the side panel when it's finished, so we can get rid of everything else. So, now we want to add an action, which is to trigger an automation. The automation we want to trigger is order more stock. The order quantity is going to be from our form order quantity. The inventory ID is from our repeater in the inventory ID. We can save that and save that. So when a user adds the right number, clicks order, then vendor number 1 is going to be requested to send us more excavators. We're almost ready to send our app live. Before we do that, let's make a couple more design tweaks. We'll go to screen and theme, and we go to lightest, brighten it up a little bit. Then we'll configure the links, navigation, configure links, just to get rid of that inventory link. We only want to be on this page. The last thing we want to do is add some inventory changes cards at the bottom so we can see the most recent changes to our inventories table. So we'll add a cards block. The cards block is listening to our inventories table already. Brilliant. Only want to show the last 6 inventory changes, say. We'll set its data in the title, and we'll use some JavaScript to calculate this. So effectively, we want to do a plus if inventory's been added, or a minus if inventory's decreased. So if our new cards block quantity change, if that is bigger than 0, then we'll return plus our quantity change. Otherwise, we'll do the same thing with a minus. Okay? So we can see +2, +5, +5. For the subtitle, we'll use inventory changes item name. And for the description, we'll use inventory changes change type. Okay, so restocks, return, sale, and these were the 2 that we generated without having the category name. Now we can publish our application and we can have our users use it. So then we can go to our launched app, we can click on a particular item, say a mixer from vendor 9, and we can order 10 more of them. Our automation will be triggered. And so now in our automations tab, or in our settings tab under automation history, we can see that that automation was triggered and we can see that the email was sent. As your database is updated by other parts of your flow, this table will always show you the latest data. Hopefully that's given you some ideas for the types of automation workflows you might be able to build into your business. You got any questions? Comment below. Have a look at the blog post that we've attached, and we hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.